Hello, everyone. Welcome back. And today we're going to be talking about intuition and openness to experience, their similarities, and how they are different conceptually. But before we get into that, I have two quick announcements to make. I am still conducting the same study that I talked about in my last video, that is going to be examining the relationship between personality, stress, and coping. If you didn't get a chance to take that study and you'd like to, the link for that will be in the description box below. If you take it, it's a really huge help to me and it helps me get more data to have a better formed analysis and better science at the end of the study. The second announcement is that I am going to be offering a new type of service through my scheduling, and that is going to be a session that's focused on how to quickly personality type others in your life. So, this is a course, or more like a one on one session, a mini course, that is going to help you identify and type others in your life in a very quick manner so that you can make changes in your life if necessary. So the reason that I decided to offer this service is because I had had people come to me during personality assessment sessions and they're like, this is great. I can type myself, but I don't really know what to do with the other people in my life. And I don't know how to find out their personality type. And I don't know how I can better interact with them if I don't know what their type is. So this is going to be kind of half educational course one on one, and then it's going to be half helping you identify or type someone in your life that you may want to know the personality type of, and they don't want to come get a session or they're not going to be able to get a session through me. So it's really there to help you find out more about people in your life and how you can quickly and heuristically get an idea of someone's type so that you can make changes as needed. So that's going to be available through my scheduling service. You can find a link for that in the description box below as well. But now let's get into the video talking about intuition and openness to experience. When we look at openness to experience, a big five personality trait, and compare it to intuition, which is a concept from the Myers Briggs or Carl Jung originally, we can see that there's a lot of overlap. They're not the exact same thing, but they are measuring and accounting for a lot of similar things. And this can be shown or proven when we look at studies that look at correlations between them. Of all the big five personality traits, when correlated to MBTI, intuition and openness tend to be the highest correlated, even more so than extroversion with extroversion, which is kind of interesting in my opinion. That means that these things are very similar, but they're not the same. And I have a good idea of what I think the conceptual differences are between these two things. And I think it's actually really important for us to know these if we want to use these two personality systems side by side. If we want to have a greater understanding of ourselves, how can we determine where the line is between intuition and openness to experience? Before we can talk about the differences between these two things, we really need to have operational and working definitions of what they are so we can understand what we're talking about in the first place. Now, intuition is something that is going to be more concretely explained in the actual Myers-Briggs system because that is where they are measuring intuition, where if you look at Carl Jung's original work, he more so just explained it, and therefore there was no way to measure it. There was no operational definition that was attempting to make it into something concrete. But I think his explanation serves as a better foundation of what it is that intuition is attempting to measure. So intuition, in the words of Carl Jung, is a psychological function that transmits perceptions in an unconscious way. Everything, whether outer or inner objects or their associations, can be the object of this perception. Intuition has this peculiar quality. It is neither sensation nor feeling nor intellectual conclusion, although it may appear in any of these forms. So the shortcut way of thinking about intuition is that it is the unconscious way of perceiving something. It is a perception that does not happen directly through your senses. It's kind of a hunch, an insight, a vision. When you think of a heuristic or a way of thinking about something that isn't guided by any immediate factual information, but it is something that you strongly kind of feel from your nervous system or just from your brain or sense of self in general, that's going to be intuition. It's one of the harder things to measure in personality because it's, by its very nature, subconscious. Openness to experience, on the other hand, is something that has a more strict definition and has been measured time and time again and shown to be a real and valid construct in the human psyche. So, it is a personality trait that is primarily concerned with intellectualism and curiosity, but we can get a better idea of what it is by looking at the six facets that make up what openness to experience is. So a facet is like a smaller trait within a trait. So we think of the personality trait of openness, then we have these six things that make up openness to experience. These are going to be imagination or fantasy, which is the preference someone has or how willing someone is to engage in imagination or fantastical thinking. We're going to have emotionality or feelings, which is going to be kind of an awareness of one's own feelings and the emotional states of the self and others. We are going to have artistic interest or aesthetics. Those is going to be how aware someone is of the aesthetic qualities of the world around them. Does something look good? Can they appreciate the looks of things? Are they captivated by colors, paintings, these sorts of things? There's going to be adventurousness or actions. This is going to be people who are very willing to engage in new experiences that are very physically engaging, I think is the best way to input it. It may be even slightly related to physical risk taking. You know, if you have someone who's going to be extremely high in adventurousness or action, they're going to be willing to go brand new places. They're going to be willing to do exciting things like maybe jump out of an airplane. You get the point. Then we have liberalism or values, which is going to be the tendency to challenge authority or traditional values. And finally, we have intellectual interests or ideas, which is important to note that this intellectualism is not the same as intelligence. We're talking about a preference for intellectually oriented things and not the capacity to do those intellectual things. So someone can be very, very high on big five openness intellectualism, even though they're not necessarily intelligent. At first glance, when you look at these two concepts, intuition and openness, you might see that there's some overlap, but not as much as you would originally think. Intuition being a perception thing is more so associated with how we take in information from the world. Whereas when we look at openness to experience, it's more about a preference for certain things. How willing are we to engage in certain aspects of the world, whether it's imagination or liberalism or intellectual interest, aesthetics, adventurousness, these sorts of things. So at first, it might be kind of hard to see where the connection lies. But when you start to dig a little deeper, you can see that intuition is something that really looks for what's beneath the surface. It's trying to gain an understanding or gain information from things that are not immediately apparent to them. And a lot of times, this is going to involve engaging in activities or things that are novel or new. This is where we can see that intuition might tie into intellectualism or intellectual interests. People who are high in intuition, who are seeking information behind the curtain, may be more prone to diving into information in intellectual topics such as the sciences. We might find that people who are intuitive or high in intuition are going to be more prone to imagination or fantasy because they're living life through their internal perceptions, which are often visual in their mind. They might daydream often. That's actually one of the highest things reported by people who score highly in intuition, is that they tend to be daydreamers, or they tend to be people who are imagining a lot of different things. So it makes sense then that someone who is high in intuition is also going to be high in imagination or fantasy. Now, where we're going to see some differences is going to be in things like emotionality or an awareness of feelings. This is not something that we're going to associate directly with intuition. We might say that people who are high in intuition might have hunches towards the emotional states of others, but because in Carl Jung's system and in the Myers-Briggs, intuition has nothing to do with decision making, it's more so the processing of information. There's going to be some differences here between how the Big Five openness might score emotionality or feelings compared to how Jung's intuition might be measuring it. So let me give an example. When we're looking at emotionality through intuition, we might say that someone who's high in intuition can get a general idea of someone else's feelings, but that might not impact what they're going to do about the idea that they have, because this is going to be connected to their thinking or feeling function. Whereas someone who is high in emotionality or feelings through openness is going to be aware of their own feelings and generally aware of the feelings of others around them, and they're going to be good at expressing those emotions. People who are low in emotionality through openness are going to be less aware of their feelings and not so good at expressing emotions. And these are things that are most so associated with thinking, feeling in the Myers-Briggs and Jungian systems. Then we can move on to artistic interests or aesthetics. This is one that could be associated either way, I think. with intuition or even sensing in the Myers-Briggs model. So people who are high in intuition might have an appreciation for what the aesthetics of something mean or imply, whereas people who are high in sensing in the Myers-Briggs might appreciate the actual visual qualities, the sensations that are being perceived from the thing that they are perceiving. And I think that's a big difference between these two, is that intuition is going to have a more under the surface appreciation, where sensing might have a more literal or direct appreciation for aesthetics. Then we have liberalism, or values associated with traditionalism. And this is one where I really think that intuition tends to lead people to question. People who are intuitive tend to be ones who don't want to go with the first thing that is immediately presented to them. They want to kind of get that deeper understanding, or at least they want to make sure that they have enough information to make some sort of meaningful decision. So they're going to look beneath the surface. They're going to ask why a lot. They're going to just generally ask a lot of questions, even if it's annoying to other people. And this is something that is going to be less present in the sensing types, who are a little more willing to just kind of go with the flow. So there is a correlation here where I think that intuitives are more likely to challenge authority or challenge traditional values, because they're more likely to want to ask questions, or to I don't want to say undermine, but get under the surface of things that they're interacting with, so that they can get a better understanding of it, which may come off as liberalism, even if they're not necessarily trying to directly challenge authority. That just tends to be the outcome of their curiosity. Finally, we get to adventurousness or actions. And this is actually the reason that I made this video, because I think this is the one that really helps us get an idea of how these two concepts, openness and intuition, are actually different from each other and where they share things in common. So what I really think is going on is that openness to experience is such a wide personality trait that captures different components of the personality, that it's actually capturing a little bit of both sides of sensation and intuition. What do I mean by this? So, adventurousness, or being willing to engage in some sort of new experience or try new things, is something that is going to be present in both sensation and intuition in different ways. So, what do I mean by that? So, someone who's very high in sensation is going to be adventurous towards things that are physical in nature, that have a sensory quality to them. They might be more interested in very active things, as I mentioned earlier, the extreme examples like jumping out of an airplane, parachuting, skydiving, extreme sports, these sorts of things. Whereas if you look at the intuitive types, they tend to be open to experiences in the more intellectual realm, in the more imagination realm, which is captured through intellectualism as a facet, imagination as a facet. So, what I really think is happening is that openness to experience is capturing both ends of the intuition sensing spectrum. And that's why there's only a partial correlation, even if it's very strong, because people who are high in sensing in the Myers Briggs are also likely to score high on adventurousness in actions, where I think that people who are high in intuition are less likely to score high in this, and they're actually probably likely to score lower. They're going to be reluctant to engage in new physical experiences, which is going to lower their score. Now, that's something I don't have concrete data to prove, but I really think that's the case. And if you were to look at these things, you would probably find that people who score higher or score as an intuitive in the Myers-Briggs are probably likely to score lower on adventurousness, while scoring higher in imagination and intellectual interests, while you would find the opposite for sensing types, who are probably very adventurous and not so interested in imagination or fantasy. So, is this a weakness of openness to experience, that it's capturing two very different things? Well, I don't necessarily think so, because there are people out there who can be both at the same time. And you're probably going to find that in the Briggs system, this is going to be people who are a little bit more balanced on intuition and sensing. They have a proclivity towards both of these things, at least a little bit, and they're not super one way or the other. If you look at someone who's very, very highly intuitive, they're probably going to be less likely to be adventurous, and vice versa for sensation. So ultimately, I think that it's actually good that openness to experience is capturing this, because there are people who can be high in both, low in both, or they can be kind of the norm, or they're generally high in either imagination, fantasy, intellectual interests, or adventurousness and these sorts of things. And again, I think that also openness to experience captures different sides or components of the perception axis in the Myers-Briggs through things like artistic interests and aesthetics, where you're going to find that both sensing types and intuitive types can be high in this trait or this facet in this case, but they're going to be doing it through different means. Whereas the sensing type appreciates the physical qualities and the intuitive type appreciates the underlying or subconscious qualities that are presented to them through intuition. Ultimately, those are the big differences, I think, between openness to experience and intuition. I think that they are very similar and capture very similar things, but I actually think that the openness to experience trait encapsulates and captures a little bit of both intuition and sensing, and that you're going to see people who are appreciating or experiencing the facets of openness to experience differently depending on where they lie on that Myers-Briggs scale. So that's actually why I think it's meaningful for us to study sensation and intuition as different concepts compared to openness to experience. Well, I think openness to experience is a very good personality trait. I think it's valuable as researchers, maybe in the future, to get an understanding of how these things differ through the lens of something like intuition and sensing that provide nuance to this overarching trait. Thanks for watching.